I'm John Keegan. I'm the chair of the Ag Commission in Boscawen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Walker. I'm chair of Durham's Agricultural Commission. And another speaker joining us today, for which I'm grateful, is Michael Barrett. He's the town of Durham's town planner.
Hello.
So I'll jump right into it here because we have a lot of stuff to cover and not much time to do it. Just to give you a brief history for some of you who don't already know about ag commissions. Ag commissions are somewhat like heritage commissions, where they are established by enabling legislation in 2007 on House Bill 293. The idea came about because Lorraine Stewart Merrill, who was our previous commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food, was at a seminar down in actually, I think, North Carolina, and heard a presentation about ag commissions from somebody from Massachusetts. And she said, well, why don't we have them in New Hampshire? So she wrote a handbook, which we'll point out later on, highlight later on, about how to start an ag commission. One of the things that needed to be done was to create enabling legislation that the towns could adopt to create ag commissions. And as most of you, at least from New Hampshire, maybe know, you can only do what the legislature allows you to do. So in 2007, we passed House Bill 293, which is how to establish ag commissions. And there are different sections that I want to go through real briefly just to give you the background of it. Could we have the first slide, Colleen? Okay, 674-44E. These are all RSAs, New Hampshire RSAs. You can look these up just by Googling the RSA, for instance, RSA 674:44E. But make sure when you do that, that you get the actual RSA and not something that somebody has copied, like the Municipal Association or somebody else, in talking about them. The important thing is at the bottom, and I don't think my cursor will point it out, but the sources of those will be dated at the bottom as to when they either became effective or were amended. And some of these have been amended, so I just want to point that out, which ones were. So, Colleen, I can't see the whole screen here, but can everybody see the entire screen? Or is it cut off on the right-hand side?
Slightly cut.
Yeah. I'll read those just so everybody can see them. An agricultural commission may be established for the recognition, promotion, enhancement, encouragement, use, management, and protection of agriculture and agricultural resources, or community significance within the natural build-a-cultural context. And the important thing is here, for those in New Hampshire, that the word agriculture shall include the entirety of the definition of agriculture, the state definition of agriculture in RSA 2134A, and that's cut off, but the reference is in a reference sheet we have. So RSA 2134A is the definition of agriculture, farm, and farming in New Hampshire. And it's really important to use that definition at the town level too, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Next slide. So what does Ag Commission do? Ag Commissions have advisory and review authority. They are not regulatory. They have advisory and review authority, much like heritage commissions do in New Hampshire. And some of the things that you can do, you don't have to do all of these: survey and inventory all of agricultural resources in the municipality. How, where, and what do you have? So you get a good idea of what's already there. Secondly, conduct activities to recognize, promote, enhance, and encourage agriculture and agricultural resources, agricultural-based economic opportunities. Third, to assist the planning board in the development and review of those agricultural areas in the master plan and also zoning ordinances. And that isn't pointed out here, but it's really important to look at your zoning ordinances and find out which ones are farm friendly and which ones aren't, and then work to possibly correct some of those. Fourth is to advise local agencies and other local boards in their review of matters affecting and potentially affecting agricultural or agricultural resources. And then coordinating activities with other organizations and nonprofits, publicize and report their activities. And that doesn't mean just in, say, an annual report, but you could do things like promoting on social media activities that you're doing relative to agriculture. Or one thing we do in Lee is put out a brochure with all the farms, most of the farms in the town, and where they're located and what they have for agricultural products for sale. Then you can also hire consultants and contractors as needed and receive gifts of money to assist in carrying out its purposes. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second here. Next slide. So how do you establish a commission? What are the nuts and bolts? The Ag Commission shall consist, and that means you have to have at least 3 members and no more than 5 members. And again, that's cut off, but the references will be in our key list here.
I think it's 7.
Yeah, no more than 7 members who shall be appointed in a manner as prescribed the local legislative body. That means either in a town that has a select board and a town meeting, you do it by a warrant article in the town meeting or on the official ballot. And towns, Teresa might want to talk about Durham a little bit, which has a town council that will be done a little bit differently. Each agricultural commission member shall be a resident of the town. One member can be a member of the local governing body, sort of as an ex officio member. Another member could be a member of the planning board, and you can have up to 5 alternate members. The important takeaway in the bottom, and again, you can't see the whole thing, but an important takeaway is that in determining each member's qualifications, the appointing authority shall take into consideration the appointee's demonstrated interest and ability to understand, appreciate, and promote the purpose of the Agricultural Commission. That's really important. When we established ours in Lee here, we made a point that the majority of the members shall be either active farmers, prior farmers who may have retired, or people that are involved in other ancillary businesses that have to do with agriculture, like a feed salesman or ag economists or agronomist or something like that, something that knows something about agriculture. Members can also serve on other municipal commissions, but the key to that is because you need to have some local common focus of where the town is going. So it's a good idea to have some interaction between committees and commissions within the town. The last slide has to do with the monies. You can establish a fund within the Agriculture Commission, which is a separate fund, and it is non-lapsing, which means that it can accumulate from year to year. Some towns appropriate money in the general fund for that to be placed into the agricultural fund every year. And in many towns, like we do in Lee and Durham, and I think Boscawen, all have different fundraising events. And I think John and Teresa will probably get into the weeds on those a little bit about how they do that. So then the money can only be spent by the town treasurer with the approval of the Ag Commission. So do you want to go, okay, how much time have we got left here? I can't see my clock.
You have a few minutes, Eric.
A couple of ones that I really want to point out that are critical for agriculture, and you can click on that first one. Oh, okay. This is a list of key laws, and if you scroll down, you can see quite a list. A lot of them have to do with establishing the Ag Commission. And again, if you Google the RSA, it'll come up. Just put in New Hampshire RSA and the number, and they will pop up. Then there are other planning and zoning statutes in New Hampshire that are really important to be able to tell what you can do and what you can't do from the state level, and that will determine what the towns can do. Can you Well, just go right down to the bottom, I think, Colleen, if you can go to the next page. Some of these other key laws, we probably won't have time to talk about them very much, but that have to do with taxation, current use, which is really important, discretionary barn or agricultural structure preservation easements, taxation of farm structures and land under farm structures. And those are all things that you can do at a town level to promote or incentivize protecting some agricultural buildings and also properties. So go back to, if you would, go back to 672 and 674 on the previous page. Can you go back to the, do you have the copies of the RSAs right there?
You want to go back to the
670, 670, let's see, can we go to those? Okay, 672:1, which is in the planning and zoning statutes. And can you click on that? Okay, if you go down to Roman 3B, well, actually 3A, that has to do with citing solar energy and the use of solar energy, particularly in agriculture, that cannot be unreasonably interpreted by essentially local regulation. So again, that's a common theme. In 3B, the important thing there is the last sentence. Agricultural activities and agritourism shall not be unreasonably regulated by the use of planning, municipal planning and zoning powers, or by the unreasonable interpretation of such powers. And then the definition of that is in 3D, which includes the failure of local land use authorities to recognize that agriculture and agritourism are regular, common practices, and that a prohibition upon these uses cannot necessarily be inferred from the failure of an ordinance or regulation to address them. And we'll talk about that a little bit longer in the next slide, if you can go to that, in 674. 674A, 32A. So whenever agricultural operations or activities and defined in 2134A, which is the definition of agriculture, are not explicitly addressed with respect to any zoning or any zoning district, agricultural operations or activities may be deemed to be permitted there so long as conducted in accordance with best management practices. So if you don't specifically address them, they are allowed. And a lot of towns don't understand that. Next slide is 32B. Okay, an agricultural use or activity, and this is a change. The word activity was added in there. Maybe without restriction, expanded, altered, or changed to another agricultural use with the following limitations. And I'm not going to go into those right now, but the big thing is the keeping of livestock, poultry, or other animals may be made to conditional use permit, site plan review, or other local land use board approval. And then the next item is sort of self-explanatory. C, really important. The tilling of soil and the growing and harvesting of crops and horticultural commodities as a primary or accessory use shall not be prohibited in any district, period. That means that you can't say you can't grow a garden in your front lawn. So the next part of that, I'm not going to get into a little at all, but if you are regulated because of parking requirements, noise, odor, or vibration, or sign regulations, if that would mean that you can't operate, then the town is required after a public hearing to grant a waiver to the extent necessary to reasonably permit the agricultural activity. So that's really important. They can't just shut you down. They have to let you operate. So the last one And note, excuse me, just go back to that if you would. Note that these were amended in September of 2019, all three of these, and also 272. Next slide. Agritourism shall not be prohibited on any property where the primary use is for agriculture, subject to the previous sections. And that was amended in 2016. So as long as you have a farm and the primary use is for agriculture of that land, then you can conduct agritourism activities. Okay, so the next thing is, if you go back to, I guess if you go back to the key RSAs, can you bring that up again? Yeah, so in some of the, down at some of the end, let's go to the next page. So the current uses, everybody know what current use is? Current use is really important in New Hampshire because that really is the key to keeping agriculture. And current use is the assessment of land based on its ability to produce a crop, essentially, in agricultural land, and produce a forest products crop in woodlands, forest lands. And that is a good idea to go through that and look at it from the standpoint of your town, how that is affecting land use in your town. 79D is discretionary agricultural structural preservation easements, which are a temporary easement, 10-year easement, and there are specific requirements for what structures qualify for that and the land under them. 79F is taxation of farm structures and land under the farm structures. That again is enabling legislation that says that if you have a farm building, and again there are requirements for that building can only be assessed at 10% of its fair market value minus depreciation, and the land under that farm structure is at 10% of the market value. Excuse me, the first one is the replacement value minus depreciation, not 10% of the market value. The land is 10% of the market value minus for 10% of the fair market value. So there's a big difference in assessment where you've got a building on land that may be ad valorem tax may be $100,000. For agriculture, it may be $10,000. So I'm not going to go into the rest of these, but we can come back to these if you've got questions about them. So that's pretty much an overview of where we're at here.
Thanks, Eric. All right, well, we're gonna move on to Teresa. She's gonna take the helm here. If you have questions about what Eric just discussed, please put them in the chat and we can address them at the end. And Teresa, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. If you could start up our PowerPoint. I'm pressing start on my 10-minute timer, Colleen, so I can pay attention. And Michael knows me well enough to interrupt me. Hi, you guys. I'm Teresa Walker. I'm chair of Durham's Agricultural Commission. Colleen asked us to share, Michael and I, to share a little bit about the Ag Commission and how it operates within, works with the town of Durham. For those of you I know who are not from New Hampshire, we have some people here. New Hampshire, Durham is the home of the State University of New Hampshire. 50% of our land area is under the jurisdiction of the State University system, which includes some agricultural use, but we're unique in that respect to some other New Hampshire towns. So next slide, please, Colleen. So we started the Ag Commission, me and a couple of other folks in town, because Eric had inspired us to in his work. And for those of you who just witnessed his talk, no one knows state RSAs and statute as competently as Eric. And because he keeps that stuff in his head and knows how they relate to other land use decisions, he's really been key to many of us in New Hampshire to advocating for an Ag Commission in our own town, because you probably just got a sense about how complicated this is in terms of how farms are operating with their local government. So in 2011, a bunch of us got together in town. some farmers, but mostly a lot of people who were concerned about other things, climate change and resiliency. They were concerned about food insecurity and people in our community needing access to food. And then people who were interested in local food production in their own yards, but maybe not at a large farm scale. So we went to our town council and asked them to create an ag commission, and they did. Our mission is to promote the production of locally grown food and fiber and forest products. And we are doing this actively with many town boards and with many town staff in a bunch of ways. And my next slide will kick off some of that. We have 12 members. Eric cited that statute, and we have a lot of expertise on them because we are home to the state university. I am really fortunate to have economists and research scientists who are very vested in New Hampshire agriculture who are on the Ag Commission. We meet monthly. We have an active annual work plan, which is really important to us. This is a group of people who want to get stuff done, and we don't want to just talk about it. We want to do it, keeping in mind that we wanted to make our town as farm friendly as possible. And in the resource list that Colleen has shared with you or will share with you, there is a number of important resources. One of them is a checklist developed by Cooperative Extension in New Hampshire several years ago that's called, Is Your Town Farm Friendly? It's an audit that you should take that lets you check boxes to identify what the impediments are to farming being successful in your community. So the first thing we did as an Ag Commission was go through that town farm friendly checklist. And one of the things we noticed right away is that in our town master plan, and in New Hampshire, every town has a master plan. It's the basis for your land use regulations. Our town master plan didn't have much conversation about agriculture. And Eric and John and others have heard me say this many times. That drove me nuts. We talked about farming in Durham as if it was something we used to do, like we stopped eating. It was crazy. So agriculture was looked at as an historic resource. It was looked at as an historic land use. It was something we used to do to keep our town scenic and rural. And so the first thing we did was contact the planning board and we asked to be involved in the town's update to the master plan back in, I guess, 2015, right, Michael? And we drafted an agricultural resources chapter of the Durham master plan. That resource is shared with you as well. Before I switch to the next slide, I'll let you know we get $2,000 a year from our town budget, and we use it in a variety of ways. This is New Hampshire, live free or die. Next slide. So I'm going to ask Michael to jump in here now in a second, but we did write that agricultural resources chapter of the Durham master plan. That chapter was based on the findings of our our farm friendly checklist and what we needed to be doing in town. I won't read through all the other things that we've done, but you guys can see this because I think, Colleen, you're sharing the presentation, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So after we finished that ag resources chapter, we had been listening carefully to Eric for years and to John in Boscawen, and we realized our town's local land use regulations were an impediment to agriculture. So we met with Michael Barrett. We went through the zoning ordinance. This took what, Michael, 3 years probably?
Total.
I'll let Michael describe how patient he was and what we did as an Ag Commission along with our town government to adopt a brand new zoning ordinance 3 or 4 months ago that's called the Town of Durham Agricultural Ordinance.
So the I do want to say, and I'm not really bragging here because I'm not I'm more of an observer, but Durham really is a bit of a model community. We have a agricultural resources master plan that's really very, very good. A lot of great information and good policy information. We have an amazing agricultural commission that's, as you can infer, very, very active and productive and happy. They're not as happy as the sheep shown here, but I've been to a lot of meetings and there's just great energy. They really enjoy it. And finally, we now have a great ordinance that's very comprehensive. And Teresa and I'm sure would be very happy to talk with anybody if you want more information about the master plan, the operation of the commission, and an ordinance. One thing that was very interesting, I'm a professional planner, so I'm, steeped in zoning. And Teresa and the Agriculture Commission originally said to me, well, the state has this very detailed statute about, the agriculture, the definition of agriculture, which includes many, many things, subject to best management practices. We just want to adopt the definition, which ostensibly would mean that anything defined as agriculture would be allowed anywhere in the town, subject to BMPs. So being a planner, I said, well, you can't really, that won't really work. If this is going to be part of zoning, it's got to be very precise, very detailed, and it's got to lay out every piece of it, what's allowed where and under what circumstances. And the commission didn't really want to hear, they didn't appreciate that. Their perception, and I think their sense of the statutes, which we had a difference of opinion about, was that, agriculture is very protected in New Hampshire, and that they could simply adopt the definition, meaning virtually all these uses would be allowed everywhere. And I don't think that's what the statutes say. And I think that communities, towns and cities do have the ability, and I would strongly encourage you to do this if you haven't already, to go through the real laundry list of all of these uses, livestock, crops, forestry, and then all the many categories within them, particularly livestock, whether it's sheep and chickens and pigs and fur-bearing animals and equestrian, horses, etc. So we went through a very, very detailed process, first with the Agriculture Commission, and we discussed, this is the very wide range of uses and sub-uses, again, fur-bearing animals, chickens, sheep, etc., with a matrix. Here are the uses, here are all of our zones, residential, commercial, and office, light industry. Where should each be allowed and under what circumstances? And should there be minimum lot sizes? And it was a lot of work. And the commission came up with really an excellent matrix that was very balanced, promoted agriculture, but was also sensitive to abutters' concerns, neighborhoods, environmental issues, water resources. Presented it to the planning board made changes, town council, they made changes, a lot of back and forth, and it was ultimately adopted. And it includes, a very detailed table of uses that's very clear and accessible for the public. And then a new section on definitions, and then a section on standards for agricultural uses that's very detailed about, particular rules for certain kinds of uses, like accessory chickens and sheep to the family, and has a table for housing and land area standards. So it's very detailed, basically 3 parts: definitions, table of uses, which is the key part, and then a whole new chapter about all of the rules and references to BMPs. And, it's new, so we'll see how it plays out. I'm sure we'll be adjusting it in the future, but it's really, I think it really found a very, very good balance. And also it has been vetted legally. Our town attorney was very involved. And again, I want to emphasize, I really do believe that you can and should go through this process of all of your uses, all of your zones, what should be allowed where, debate it. You'll get difference of opinions, minimum lot size, rules, allowed, not allowed, conditional use, special exception. It's not as bad as you think. Just make a matrix and go through it. And I think that that's what the statutes encourage and support. There's certain things you can't do. You have to allow crops in every zone. But so it was really a very, very good process for us. And, again, Teresa and I'd be happy to, send on our ordinance, and feel free to call us or email us, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Michael. I think the new ag ordinance from Durham is in the list of resources. Another resource that we would refer you to is, it's called Local Regulation of Agriculture. It's specific to New Hampshire, but the state statutes that Eric referenced and the process that Michael just described, that resource kind of brings them all together in one flow chart. So you can check to see what the opportunities might be in your community. And if you're not in New Hampshire, certainly the assessment that Eric provided of your state's state legislation about agriculture are the place to start. Michael's right, livestock was a real friction point for us here in Durham. It was where we spent the most time because we have several established neighborhoods, and the idea of perhaps large livestock embedded in them was not something that people in Durham, or at least local decision makers, some planning board members and town council members were comfortable with. So we are striking a balance, but ultimately we are meeting our Ag Commission mission, which is we're enabling more agriculture in town. And we move on Monday night, Michael. Michael's not done with me yet. We are expanding a boundary in Durham. We have several zones, as he mentioned. Most of them are residential. We have a rural zone where I'm fortunate, and my sheep in that photo are fortunate to live, which has always enabled more agricultural activity. So we are going to expand that rural boundary. So that's something, our next proposal that we're taking to the planning board. Can you click to the next slide, Colleen? I'm conscious of time. So in addition to working with Michael, the Ag Commission works with the Code Enforcement Officer. We work with the Parks and Recreation Department, all those commissions and town staff, basically to make sure that we are a farm-friendly community. We also work with regional farmer market organizations. We'll do anything to get the word out there that active agriculture takes place in town, that people are growing food and producing it here in town. It's important to note, for those of you in New Hampshire, I guess, is that as the home to the state university, before COVID and after COVID, prior to COVID, I guess, the university dining hall is the largest server of food on a daily basis. So in the state of New Hampshire, more food, more meals are served on campus 2 miles from my house than any place else in town. So it's a unique economic development opportunity for people to be producing food. So there's all kinds of ways of looking at your town and to identify where that economic development opportunity relative to agriculture might be. The next slide, Colleen, please. So here's our 2021 work plan. We survived the zoning ordinance. Michael survived it too. It wasn't easy sometimes. We are now expanding our reach and talking about different scales of farming and gardening in town. We really want to talk about cooperative and neighborhood scale farming and gardening, letting people who may not have the soil or the sun resource work with their neighbors to be cooperative and work on food production. Our annual Durham Farm Day, boy, I could spend hours talking about that. It's a great day, the third Saturday in August. And we've demonstrated lots of farm and gardening activities. This year, we're going to have people be able to actually practice some of those skills. So we have a list of things we'll be doing. And then finally, we're going to look beyond our small town boundaries here and really be promoting what we're looking at as the immediate food shed of Durham, Lee, and Madbury. We're 3 small towns that already work cooperatively as a school district. We function that way as a school district. So it's a kind of a comfortable cooperative existing arrangement. And we're going to, as an Ag Commission, look at ways that we can educate Durham residents about promoting, buying food from farms within our little fiber shed. And I think there's one more slide maybe. So we're getting a lot done. We're doing it in partnership with Michael and many other people. We are happy to share any of this information. Now it's John's turn.
Thank you.
Another leader.
Yes, and we'll be sharing all contact information at the end or in a follow-up email, as well as the recording of this session. So I'm going to pass it to John. John can finish this out here, and then we'll move into some Q&A discussion time for everybody. So
Well, thank you. You received a really in-depth and broad introduction to what ag commissions are here in New Hampshire. Don't be overwhelmed. You're operating in the public sector, you're bridging to the private sector. There's lots going on. And I think that what I'll focus on is some practical issues that you might want to consider as you begin planning and pursuing your goals. We've been an active ag commission for about 10 years. And Eric and Teresa were key people in us getting started, along with the local conservation commission. They were the people that sort of lit the candle and got this started, because some of the selectmen were looking at the landscape literally and wanted some balance there in terms of how the town would move forward. So there are a couple of, well, actually there are three things that we really work to keep actively in front of us as we move along. One thing is good relationships. You never know what's going to happen politically, or who's going to be moving or whatever. So we try to maintain a pretty broad membership. We do have active farmers, but we also have other people who are gardeners. We have one individual who worked in the nursery industry. And we just try to use those contacts to keep us in good communication with a broader range of people out in the community and also within the town office. Another thing was that we set about pretty systematically to develop credibility with other local boards and commissions. As I said earlier, we had a very active conservation commission. The boards for zoning and planning and whatever were in place, and we were the new kids on the block. So we looked for opportunities to work with those folks, even sometimes, kind of pushing ourselves into a discussion so that the agricultural perspective was on the table and actively discussed. And that's proven to be a really valuable sort of tactic, because now when the planning board or the zoning board gets something that, sort of twinges of agriculture, before they meet to decide these things or even discuss them, we as members of the Ag Commission will get phone calls, or the town administrator will give me a ring and say, this is happening, we're discussing that, it's coming up to the select board or maybe the planning board, and just want some informal kind of, okay, this is where it might go, that's where it might go. What do you think? Just a little background information so that you don't get thrown into the discussion late in the process or when it's become polarized. And in that way, you can keep credibility among a broad audience. The other piece that we've done is we've tried to stay active and in front of the public continually. We've always got some small project going on, something that people are going to know about. The first thing we did was we offered a monthly educational program directed at gardeners and hobby farmers and whatever, that we did with cooperative extension. And that was a tremendous success. It gave us visibility not only in Boscawen, but in surrounding towns. And we were able to draw on resources from throughout the county. Another thing we did was we had sort of a renaissance of small farmers about 5 to 7 years ago here in Boscawen. And there was land available and people came to town. And there was a lot of talk about how do you add value to your products and not try to use the farmers markets where people were beginning to discover that they were spending a lot of time invested and didn't have a good return. And so we partnered with some folks at Colby Sawyer College up in New London and had a student dedicated to doing some research just to see what farmers wanted and what they would do and how much they needed and this sort of thing. And then we went to the State Development Group. The exact name escapes me, but anyway, we wrote a project proposal. And some of you may know Charlene Anderson. She did a feasibility study for us to look at possible locations for a common kitchen. So before we rushed into that, we got some data and did the groundwork. And I don't think that would have happened if the commission hadn't been at the center of that. And in the end, we looked at 3 possible sites and discovered that the economics just wouldn't work. So instead of getting ourselves, head over heels into something that wasn't going to be economically viable, we generated some good data. In fact, it's still been used from time to time, but we didn't make an investment mistake. The other thing we've done to stay in front of folks is a very active community garden program. The town was able to identify a plot that they owned that wasn't being used. And we were able to put the community garden program together about, this is 9 to 10 years ago. We started out with 40 plots. We're now up to 74. And these are 12 by 12s that are grouped into quadrants. So we have a spigot in the middle of the 4 plots. So there's irrigation. And those 12 by 12s, you get a deal if you buy all 4 for 45, or it's 12 a piece. And we focused on people in town, and then people that work in town, and then the neighboring municipalities. And then beyond that, it's sort of catch as catch can. But over the last 2 years, we've gone from under 60 plots to 74. And it looks like this year we're going to be oversubscribed again. So we'll probably up the ante next year. The COVID virus has really had an effect on people wanting to produce some of their own food, have a little more control over that. And it's proved to be pretty successful. So I think that with the background that we presented you with today, I just wanted to give some tangible examples of how to get started, some of the things to consider when you do get started, and then the 3 of us can act as resources to provide you with answers to some of these, what seem to be simple questions. But as Eric has demonstrated with the RSAs, things can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. And then Teresa with the planning connection, how you can turn ideas into activities and product. So that's really what I had to say. And I think the most useful thing right now would be to get some questions and see if we can provide some direction or useful answers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Teresa and Eric as well, and Michael. That was very informative, and I think there are definitely a lot of questions. So let me try and get to some of these in here. Let's see. Cheryl asked, are equine establishments covered under the definition of farming? So any one of you can take that one. Go ahead, Eric. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Yes, it is in RSA 2134A. Are you in New Hampshire, first of all? I guess if you are, under RSA 2134A, Roman 2, I believe 5, the husbandry, boarding, training, and riding instruction of equines is defined as part of the definition of agriculture. So yes, it is included, and that's been a sticking point in a number of towns, but it is part of the definition of agriculture. Can I just make one other point, I guess, before you go on to other questions, and I'll bounce off something that Michael said about standards as far as housing, particularly, or how many acres do you need for a particular thing. In referencing the best management practices for agriculture, those are specifically guidelines. They are not standards at the state level. And I would really advise towns not to adopt them as standards. For instance, if you have a standard of, say, a 10 by 10 pen for a horse, well, it's different if you've got a 3,000 pound percher on than if you've got a 400 pound mini horse. So it should be based more on performance standards than actual dimensional standards, in at least my experience. And to accomplish really what it is that you want to accomplish, is it limiting because of the size of the operation, or because of the size of the animal, or some other thing like possibility for pollution. But if you have a dimensional standard, that's really difficult to enforce too, because what if you're off a 1/4 inch on 10 by 10 pen? Does that mean you're in violation of the standard? So I would caution you to really look at that and sort of focus more on the performance standard than on the dimensional standard, using the best management guidelines as a base.
And we had lots of conversation, as Michael knows, the standards versus guidelines. And I think as an Ag Commission chose to keep working together on that. We do have an Ag Commission member that's creating a spreadsheet, a livestock kind of housing guidelines based on just what Eric described, but we didn't want to hold up the whole ordinance based on that.
Yeah.
One other thing, Colleen, before you get to your other questions, sorry, you guys, is that in addition to that food farm-friendly checklist that we've mentioned, that a couple people in the chat have asked for, an inventory of farms and gardens in town is a really great place to start. Lee did it. Eric has great stories about that. And Durham did it too. So we conduct a windshield analysis and kind of a Google map analysis. It's not out there for exploitation. It's really for us to get a ground check on what's happening in town, because I think people are always surprised to learn how much active agriculture and active gardening at the community scale, as well as the backyard scale, is happening in communities. So for you to get a snapshot of what is happening in your town is a great place to start that advocacy for an Ag Commission, to document what you have already.
Great, thank you. Thank you both for that.
May I have a follow-up question on the equine?
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we're seeing in our agricultural community, particularly sort of a merging of agriculture and equine interests. A lot of our farmers, of course, they don't necessarily make their living entirely by farming. They do other kinds of things as well. And some of it may be solar, but some of it may be taking the interest in training sort of the usual equine activities, but now bringing kids onto the farm to learn about animal care and it's not necessarily a camp, because apparently that gets into another can of worms. But how are Ag Commissions thinking about, for instance, how farmers are wearing multiple hats in order to secure a more varied income stream so that they're not entirely being supported by their farming activities?
Well, Eric referenced that in the agritourism definition, in our state definition of agriculture too. I would think part of that's captured by that. And I think all farms are around the country probably have had a long history of doing that to survive, whether it be inviting people to stay and farm stay and all those things that we've known forever. And it's been an intricate part of agricultural land use in New Hampshire to invite the public onto the farm for something that is a farm related activity. But Eric can speak to that very well.
That reference, if you look at RSA 2134A, it would be 2B5, I believe. It talks about the marketing and selling, and also agritourism, the definition of agritourism, what that means. And as Teresa said, and that's why if you look at the source dates on some of these RSAs, particularly 2134A and the planning and zoning statutes in 672 and 674, we changed those in 2019 to include activities, because that was not previously included. And the interpretation by some of the towns was you can't do that stuff because it's not in the RSA. So activities, meaning what you've been talking about, and other agritourism activities such as showing people how to do things, or having activities that include people participating in things. Those are all things that would come under the definition of agritourism, as in Roman 2B5 in 2134A. So, and we spent a lot of time actually with the New Hampshire Municipal Association in making sure we had the wording that everybody agreed to there. As Teresa said, with all this stuff, you have to have some give and take. And it's going to be site specific in some places. It's going to be site specific from the standpoint of how the towns feel about agriculture. What you do in Nashua is going to be different than what you do in Colebrook. And the philosophy around that is going to be a little bit different too.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Cheryl, for your questions. Ed, you have quite a few. I'm going to try and combine two of your questions here. It looks like you had a question about working through resistance to having livestock in the town, as well as kind of the general who or what was an impediment to starting a commission, who were the supporters, kind of questions about that. So Teresa, John, or Eric, you can feel free to share your experiences there.
One experience that we have that kind of speaks to that is, I don't know how many of you remember, but several years ago, there was a gentleman who was trying to start a chicken farm down in Dunbarton. And his land was zoned that he could do so, but it was next to a new development. And the people in the development, along with a couple of allies on the planning board, were not going to allow this to go forward without some draconian changes to the design and the plan that made it just not viable. So he chose to move on to another town not far from there, and met the same sort of resistance. At that point, one of the members of our commission, who's a retired professor from UNH, had been working with him as an advisor. And in Boscawen, we've been looking for new business, be it agricultural or not. And we had some land that we thought he would be able to use for his development. He was working for Pete and Jerry's, the organic egg producers that are up in Monroe, New Hampshire. And they were feeling some negative heat in terms of the market, and were reluctant to risk a third attempt. We talked to the gentleman who had the idea of the farm. He was willing to go ahead. So myself, as chair of the Ag Commission, the chair of the planning board, and the town administrator along with another member of the Ag Commission who had worked with this company for years and years, we approached the company and said, you know, we have a site. It's within the in the area that you need to put in a production facility, and the town would welcome it. And between you know, them reassessing what they were doing and our, you would say, guarantees that it would be doable in Boscawen, we made it happen. And the farm has been a success. In fact, he's thinking of doubling his capacity. So one thing that ag commissions can do, if you get to a point where things might be irresolvable, you can look for alternatives. And in this case, I think if the Ag Commission hadn't been alert to what was going on, that development never would have happened.
Great. Thank you, John, for that. Teresa,
I'm putting some answers in chat too. Just
yeah, I just saw your answer to that question. I think that's a good thing. Let's shout that out a little bit, and then Eric, I know we wanted to do this in the beginning, but we're going to do it now. If you want to kind of talk a little bit about the active commissions right now that are up and running.
Thanks, Colleen. I was going to suggest that we do that. I just kind of held off to see who was in there already, but I'm just going to go through this list, and if you have additional towns or municipalities that have an ag commission or are thinking of starting an ag commission, I see that Ed Canane is interested in doing one. By all means, let us know, and I think we can help you out as far as designing or coming up with proper wording for a warrant article that might help you along a little bit so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to read this list, and I'll also say if we've got, how much time? We've got a minute, 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
the date that they were established. Brookfield, I think, was 2009 or 10. Boscawen was 2010. Canterbury, 2009. And I'm not sure whether they're active right now or not. Chester, 2011. Chichester, 2010. Durham, 11. Effingham, 10. East Kingston, 11. Fitzwilliam, 11. Harrisville, 11. Hollis, 09. Keene, I'm not sure. That would have been, I think, fairly recently. Lee in 2008. Loudon, 2008. Marlow, 2008. Merrimack, 8. Nelson, 11. Newton, 11. Northampton, 9. Peterborough, 11. Richmond, 11. Sandwich, 10. And I'm not sure whether they're active. They were established. Tuftonboro, 9. Ware, 8. Wolfboro, 9. And Webster, I'm not sure, that was maybe 10 or 11. The other thing is, if you have an ag committee, the ag commissions have to be established by the legislative body in a warrant article. If you have an ag committee or people interested in starting an ag committee just to do some of the preliminary work, which is what we did in Lee, which actually started in 2004, I think, you can have the governing body, whether it's select board or council, establish that committee. And that gives you a foot to get started doing some of the preliminary work, so you don't have to just come out of the blue and establish something and then play a game of catch up.
Well, thank you so much, Eric and Teresa and John and Michael. This was great. It is exactly 1 o'clock. So we'll definitely, we'll stop here for today. I know we could talk all day about this. We will follow up with a list of resources that we talked about. We'll follow up with the slide presentation as well as a recording of this session so you can use it to review and share it with others as needed. Any other follow-up questions, we can get those to Teresa, Eric, or John, or Michael if you guys need some questions answered. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending.